you can talk with each other or talk to somebody at home, hang on just a second. I didn't hear you. All right, we're back. Sorry about that, but we're glad you're joining us tonight again. Fourth week of our basic class, Membership 101. And we have covered quite a bit of material in 3 weeks. And I have usually stretched it out. I shouldn't say that. It's been sometimes up to 8 weeks to do this. But we're not going to take 8 weeks. We'll be tonight next week, and then we'll kind of go from that. So anyway, we have covered what we are, who we are, what we believe. And tonight we're going to talk a lot about our strategy as a church and what we believe and who we cooperate with, for lack of a better term, and a little bit about Southern Baptist. In Florida especially, there is I don't want to say a hodgepodge, but there is a mixture of people that come to Florida from all different backgrounds and all different faiths. And so when they come, and then the term Southern Baptist is brought up, usually there's been a stigma with Southern Baptist for years, maybe. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks this, but I think I'm pretty accurate with this. And the stigma has been usually Southern Baptists have been fire and brimstone, screamers and hollers. And at one time we were. But I think that there's been a change in that mindset. We have, the convention, Southern Baptist Convention, has gone through a series of changes for years and years and years, and we've gone from, I wouldn't call it quite liberalism, but I would call it moderatism, to conservatism and back and forth. So there's been this wave of theology thoughts, I guess, or theology doctrine that has come and gone. And I think sometimes we have to kind of go back to where we started and why we started to kind of get a better idea. And then we'll talk about Southern Baptist tonight, and then we'll talk about what we do as a church with that name and what that allows us the privilege of and what it allows us to be a part of. In one of the classes that I teach, it's on different faiths and what they believe. I believe at one time I looked, I believe there were 60, don't hold me to this, but maybe 55 to 65 different Baptists. There was North American Baptist, there was Southern Baptist, there was General Baptist, there was Primitive Baptist, there was Backwoods Baptist. There was, everybody had a different, and they all started, from one. That's one thing about Southern Baptist, or I think Baptist in general, is if we don't like what we do, we'll start something different. And Cooperative Baptist Fellowship has been the recent one that's just come out of this. And of course, the big name behind the CBF is Jimmy Carter. Carter was a staunch Southern Baptist, and then in some of his learnings, I suppose he felt like that maybe the Southern Baptists were a little too conservative, and so he went into a Conservative Baptist Fellowship, CBF it's called. It's based out of Atlanta. They're a lot into social ministries, so that tells you a little bit about that they do a good work. I was in a church in Gainesville, and I was doing a wedding at a church in Gainesville, and of course it wasn't my church, so I got there a little early and just kind of looked around to see what was going on, you know how you do. And that church allowed the people in their congregation to donate to the Southern Baptist, or they could donate to the Conservative Baptist. You had a different way of giving to that, and I thought that was a little unique. But we have gone through our shares of splits and resplits and devices, and I think that's. I hate to say that, but that seems to be the way that we do things. And if you ever read the history of Southern Baptist, it's been going on for a long time. It's not something new, but that's where we're at. So let's talk a little bit about Baptist. Now we're not talking at this point. We're not talking Southern Baptist. We're just talking about Baptist. In the early 17th century is when Baptist became, if you will, a denomination. It started in England during the time of there was some real religious reform taking place in England. And so the Baptists separated themselves to get away from that. And there was four reasons of why basically what the Baptists were doing in England was they were separating themselves from the state church. State church in England was run by the government, so the government would tell the priests what to say, and they pretty much controlled everything. So the church really wasn't so much of a church as it was just another part of the government. In that reform that came through there was this intensity to get away from the state church because of at least four major issues, and I'll share those with you. The first was infant baptism. The church state or the state of the church in England believed in infant baptism, and they believed that that's what they needed to do. So there's this group that would later become Baptist that said, no, infant baptism is not the way to go. It's for the purpose of what true baptism is. And we talked about baptism 2 or 3 weeks ago, I guess, and the purpose of it. And so they were baptizing infants, sprinkling infants more than anything else. And this group said, no, we believe baptism is based upon what we've talked about here a couple of weeks ago. Baptism is based on profession of faith, and it's a testimony. So the number one, these aren't in any particular order, but these were the four major distinctions that caused the Christians to separate from the church state. Infant baptism. The second was baptism by immersion. And again, that goes back to that church state, or that state church rather, where they sprinkled. And as the Baptists studied Scripture, as we've talked about, we believe that baptism by immersion is the way that Christ was, and that was the example. That's what we're taught to do, and so that's what we did. So infant baptism, baptism by immersion. The third driving element to separate that group in England was eternal security. They were teaching that you could lose your salvation, and so this group of what we know now as Baptists broke off from that and said, no, salvation is once, it's secure. Again, as we talk about this issue, the thing that comes to my mind is, I have people all the time ask me, I seem to be doubting my salvation. Is that normal? And I think that some of that is normal. I think that's the enemy's ploy on us. But I think that we need to be assured that it's not done by works. It's done by salvation, by faith. And this eternal security seems to come up when the thought process is a works-based faith. In other words, if I can do enough, I'm going to be saved. But if I don't do enough, then I'm going to lose my salvation, and as a result of that, then I won't have the eternal security. Scripture tells us in the book of John that, nobody will pluck you out of my hands is the one that I always use on that. And so that group in England, as they looked at things, they said, no, we can't lose our salvation if we're truly saved. In our present situation, and I've said this before, and I share with some folks this week, that if there comes a point in your life where this becomes a real issue, I'm not really for sure I'm saved. I came forward, I filled out a card, I was baptized, and I joined a church, but I'm not for sure that was a real deal. Then what I always tell them to do at that point is this. I tell them to get alone someplace, get alone with God, and say, God, here's the deal. If I'm not saved, save me now. But if I am saved, forgive me my doubting, and from this day forward, never let me doubt again. And then in their Bible, write down that date that they made that comment. And anytime the enemy comes back and says, no, you're not really saved, you just think you are. No, I settled it that day. And this came from a pastor friend of mine who I was saved under, as a matter of fact, Tom Bennett. He was in Bob Jones University, and if you know anything about Bob Jones University, it's very conservative. At that time, it was really conservative. And he was studying to go into ministry. And he said one day in class, he said this doubt just kept coming up and coming up and coming up. And he said, it just kept eating my lunch. So he said, I just got alone after class. I got down on my knees beside a desk, and I said, okay, Lord, if I'm not saved, save me. And if I am, never let me doubt again. And he said, I wrote that down. He said, that's in my Bible today, that date. Because I think the enemy will use this losing your salvation a great deal against us, because we are a works-based people. Everything we do is based upon our works. When you worked, the more you did, the more you got. That as a contractor, the more you do, the more you're going to get. So everything is based upon producing. And then we come over to our faith, and it's not based on producing, it's simply just based on faith and knowing that it's a one-time deal. It's very hard for us. That group in England was battling eternal security. They were battling infant baptism, baptism by immersion. And the fourth thing they were doing was the separation of church and state. Now, we hear a lot about that today. It's becoming even more prevalent with COVID, and everybody has an opinion on that. And when COVID first happened here, and we were in the process of trying to figure out what we needed to do, we had a conference call with Senator Rubio. And I didn't know much about Senator Rubio until that conference call, but he is a real firm believer. I mean, he is strong in his faith. And it was brought up to him at that point that there was a church in Gainesville that was going to continue to meet. And the city council came out and said, no, they could not meet. And they asked Senator Rubio about it. And he said, this is not a point of separation of church and state. They're not telling you what you can't preach. What they're doing there is they're saying for the safety, this is not a theological issue. This is not I'm telling you what to preach and what to believe. This is a safety issue. So he said, my thoughts would be, adhere to the government. That's what we're mandated to do in Scripture. So separation of church and state's come back in real heavily here in the last 3 months with all this going on. In England, of course, that was strictly a state-run church. And so they had no freedom whatsoever to do anything except what the state told them to do, the government of England. And so that was one of the reasons they decided to split off of that in the Reformation and become somewhat different than everybody else. But those were the four major issues: infant baptism, baptism by immersion, eternal security, and separation of church and state. So they broke off in England, and then everybody came west in the colonial period. Now, when that occurred, the First Baptist, not First Baptist, but the original Baptist church, I guess I should say, in America, when they came over from England, they arrived in the early 18th century, or rather 17th century, I'm sorry, and there was a fellow by the name of Roger Williams. And he established the First Baptist Church of Providence, Rhode Island. That's where it all started. Now, it's interesting because if you were to look at a map and you were to kind of give it a painting, I guess, the southern states we call the Bible Belt: Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. You go north, and but how we see it is those are primitive areas. New England is a very difficult area to share the gospel because it's so indwelled in, I believe, ritualism. It's indwelled in churchism, for lack of a better term. I've got a good friend, as a matter of fact, we're going up there in a couple of weeks to his ordination, and he has an evangelical church in Maine. It's a very difficult work. It's interesting that as the Baptists came over from England, of course, they all came to New England, and so the first church to start there as the Baptist denomination, I guess, would be that First Church of Protestants, Rhode Island, and that was in 1639. So they carried their beliefs over to the new land, and there they started a work. The first national organization of Baptist churches was called the American Baptists. They were formed in 1814. So you can see there was a long time between 1639 and 1814 before the Baptists really started to develop in America. As much as they came over for that freedom, it was still a long time to get to this. And believe it or not, that denomination, if you will, the first national organization of Baptists, was from a mission effort that came from overseas. So the missionaries came to America to evangelize us. Now we're going there. But I will tell you this, that there are missionaries today coming to America to evangelize Americans from other countries. And you would think that shouldn't be, because we have a church on every corner. But again, it just goes to show, what I'm talking about. So they started in 1841. Now they had their first denomination. And how do I want to say this cautiously, because I will probably get a little email on this. Denominations are good, but when they become the main thing, they become bad. And I think that we put so much emphasis on denominationalism that it's become a hindrance to some of the work. As you'll see as we kind of go through what happens here, And I mean that because if we don't like what we're doing, we start something else and go. Instead of trying to resolve the issue and find the truth in the matter, it's easier to pick up our ball and go home and start another denomination. And then denominations become the dominant force and not a relationship with Christ. You know, you ask people, well, what are you? Most people say I'm a Southern Baptist. No, you should be a Christian. Then Southern Baptist is who I'm affiliated with, or General Baptist, or whomever. So they came over. 1814, they started this first denominational. And then in that 1840s period, there became a great debate between the Baptists in the north and Baptists in the south concerning missionary appointments and slavery. So everybody says, well, the Southern Baptists started because of the slave issue. That was only part of it. How they started in Southern Baptist was they felt like that they weren't getting the missionary emphasis in the southern part of the states as was being placed in the northern part of the states. Now remember, by 1840s, that the country has grown and it's starting to really become a country. So those Baptists in the South are saying, listen, you're putting all your money and all your energies and all your efforts into all this work up here, and we're not getting anything down here. And part of the reason was slavery. So at that point, they decided, you know what, we need to form our own denomination. 1845, May the 8th, that's my birthday, not 1845, but May the 8th. There were 293 Baptist leaders from the South, and they met in Augusta, Georgia. Now, at that time, they would represent over 350,000 Baptists in the South. So there was a lot of Baptists in the South. 350,000 in that time period was a lot of numbers. And they met, and on May 9th, they decided to separate from the American Baptist, which was the original one that came in. And on May 10th, the Southern Baptist Convention, if you will, was formed. And the purpose of that convention was to help cooperating churches lead people to God through faith in Christ. So that was the main purpose of that. So that's how Southern Baptist came about. Slavery was a part of it. Also, missionary efforts was a part of it, that they didn't feel like they were getting a fair shake in missionary efforts. So we started there, and boy, the story takes off from there. If you've done any history on Southern Baptist, we have just been all over the place. Now, I will say that we've done a great deal. I mean, we are, well, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, but where we stand now and what we're doing, although the numbers are starting to decline a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's how Southern Baptist came into being. Are we different than Northern Baptist? Are we different than General Baptist? Usually it's missionary efforts, is it? Some landmark Baptists believe that you have to be baptized into the church. In other words, if you join this church and you were baptized at your church, but because it's a church ordinance, you have to be baptized into membership into this church. That's kind of a landmark, this thought process. We don't believe that. We believe that baptism is a church universal. So if you're baptized by immersion, then that takes, you know. So there's landmark, there's primitive Baptist, you know, there's King James Version only Baptist. And like I say, the list goes on and on and on and on. And each of them have their own little tweak that makes them unique from the other ones. And what's really sad about the whole thing, quite honestly, is that it's split what could be a great thing and made it to a lot of multi-little things. Is that good or bad? Well, I mean, there's strength in numbers, obviously, but I think again, I look at the outside world and those who aren't saved, and I look, well, they're always fighting. You know, the Baptists are always fighting, or whomever. You know, and stop and think about that. You don't really hear a lot about Lutherans fighting. Do you? Methodists, of course, they've had the gay rights thing. But a lot of the other denominations, you don't hear about the constant infighting within the denomination. You know, Lutherans are Lutherans, and they're like, oh, okay, well, just love each other. You know, Baptists are like, oh no, I'm not loving you. I'll start my own denomination. You know, so that's kind of where we're at with that. But I'm proud to say that we are an active part of the Southern Baptist Convention at First Baptist Developers. So let me tell you how we cooperate as a church, as a cooperating Southern Baptist church. There's three different ways that we cooperate. And I say the word cooperate, that I guess I could use that term to say that we're involved in, incorporated in, or a part of. Probably be a better way of putting it like that. First of all, on a local level, we cooperate with what we call the Pasco Baptist Association. The Pasco Baptist Association has its office on State Road 54, just before you get to State Road 41. The Pasco Baptist Association is made up of 34 Southern Baptist churches. They're not all in Pasco County, but you would think with Pasco Baptist that's where it would be, but they're not. There's some, we've got some in Anclote, down, just in Pinellas County, some in Hillsboro. And like I say, 34 churches. We have what we call a director of missions. It's a paid position, and the DOM, or director of missions position, is to help all 34 churches in the needs that they have in any way that he can. So he is kind of I don't want to say an overseer, but he is the one who kind of supports and helps the resources with the local churches. Associations can be big, they can be small, depending on where you're at. I served in Keystone on the New River Association. It was a smaller association because it was a more rural area. But, you get Suncoast Baptist, you get Tampa Bay Baptist. Those are huge, Orlando, because there's so many churches there. So they have a lot more resources. Our local association offers training from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. So if you want to continue your education through seminary, you can do it through them, and they have a class there that they take. Of course, the Wild Game Dinner is a big outreach for us. Praying for Pasco is another emphasis that they have, praying for the county. And so the Pasco Association is there to help all the churches do together what they can do better than just being independent. Now, what's happening is, in the associational level, is, I believe, the larger the churches get, the less need they have for an association. You take a church like Idlewild Baptist, which is, in my opinion, a mega church. They can do all their own printing. They can do all their own training. They can do all of the things an associational can do because they're so large. But then again, you take a small church that even like smaller than us, I think the average church size for Southern Baptist is like 80 people. So we're above the average on that. But those churches have a hard time getting resources and training. So this is where the association can kick in and do that. We can call on our association anytime we need to and say, listen, we need help, and they will be there to help us. When Billy Graham came in I think he was here in 96 in Tampa area. He did a crusade in Tampa. Between state money and I think it was a Southern Baptist Convention, they wanted to start X amount of new churches in the area off of the Billy Graham crusade because we knew that there was going to be a tremendous amount of growth. And the Pasco Association had a new works ministry, and our job in that department was to develop new churches. If I'm not mistaken, during that time, I want to say there were six new churches started in the area. So, it's a great resource. And so on a local level, there's 34 churches that can come together and meet together and work together to do what needs to be done to meet our needs because each area is unique. Carolyn, up in Palatka and those areas, that's a different world than it is here. So the associational needs up there would be completely different than they are here. So that's the Pasco Association. We're affiliated with that. The second thing we're affiliated with is the Florida Baptist Convention. Florida Baptist Convention is the whole state of Florida, taking all these associations and all the churches in the state of Florida, Southern Baptist churches, and who cooperate with the Florida Baptist Convention. Florida Baptist has just over 2,400 Southern Baptist churches in Florida as of right now. So that's quite a few as well. I mean, that's a large number. Some are big, some are small. Florida Baptist, for years, we were under the leadership of Dr. John Sullivan. And I was always so proud to say that I was from Florida because I think that during that time, and I'm not saying we don't now, but Florida Baptist had the best state convention. Dr. Sullivan worked hard at it, and he developed, under his ministry, there were so many things that were started. We developed a working relationship with Haiti, West Virginia. I think it was Montana or Wyoming. And so we had working relationships where we as Florida Baptists would help those different areas. That's how we got involved in Haiti. When we started working in Haiti, the emphasis with the Florida Baptists was with Haiti. And a WMU director at my former church said, hey, would you go to Haiti with us? And I said, yes, where is it? Had no idea where Haiti was. And she said, we work with the Florida Baptists, and they're doing a work down there. So it was very easy to plan a mission trip. You contacted the state and said, listen, we've got 12 people. We want to do work. What can we do? Okay, well, give me your dates. We'll plug you in. And so we saw Haiti really go from the years we started in 1998 or 1999, I think, is when we first went to Haiti, up until we haven't been able to go because of unrest. But we saw great strides in Haiti with, now the problem, and I don't mean to get on a tangent here with missions, but the problem with Haiti is, and I don't know if you know much about the island of Haiti. The island of Haiti was a holding area for slaves that came from Africa to come to the New World, and so they stopped in Haiti, and there they stayed. Well, the slaves got to a point that the situation was so bad that they decided they'd make a pact with the devil. They thought it was easier to sell their soul to the devil than it was to become a slave. So they signed this contract. Now, I don't know who signed on behalf of the devil, but it was a 200-year contract. That contract expired right around 1980s, sometime mid-80s. And from that time on, evangelism just took off in Haiti. It was like somebody lifted a veil off of that country. Now, there's a lot of political issues going on in Haiti. Of course, it's dictator-run, and they've still got problems now. They have a president in office who nobody wants. The parliament's been disbanded, so he's pretty much running the country on his own. Government's very corrupt, extremely corrupt in Haiti. It's all about, there's two classes in Haiti, the poor and the rich, and there's nothing in between. And so the poor have absolutely nothing to point that they're begging for food and water, and the rich have everything to where they can just buy it. And so when that contract was extended or expired with the devil, evangelism just broke loose, but the problem was everybody went to Haiti. So you're getting Latter-day Saints, you're getting Mormons, you're getting Catholics, everybody went to Haiti. So those who were in Haiti and they were hungry for the word because they'd lived under this contract, now we're just open to everything. So they were getting taught any type of theology, and it was such a mismatch, to be honest with you. I remember teaching a pastoral leadership class, and I always ended with questions and answers, and I should have known I shouldn't have done that, And we'd always had an interpreter, of course, they speak French Creole. So I said, are there any questions? And a fellow in the back, and you have to understand, these guys would walk 4 hours to come to a class. They'd sleep in a church on a concrete floor. They would wear a shirt and tie every time. They were just phenomenal. The question was, can you baptize the dead? And I thought he was kidding. And this is something else. If you ever go on a mission trip, sometimes your humor and their humor don't go together. You can tell a joke and think it's hilarious, and they're just going to look at you like, what was that all about? So I said to the interpreter, I said, is he serious? He said, yes, he's very serious. Because they had been taught by somebody that you could baptize the dead. So Haiti has that mix. That's not what we're talking about, but the Florida Baptist Convention took Haiti on as part of that. So the Florida Baptist Convention does a tremendous amount of work throughout the state. Florida Baptist Disaster Relief is a part of that. Now Haiti has been our emphasis now is on Cuba. We're putting missionary emphasis into Cuba. But the convention, the Florida Baptist Convention, works with the local association, but it also works with churches. If I can call the Florida Baptist Convention and say, listen, we need some help in this area, and they would send somebody down to train and help us with that. Very good. I can remember on several occasions where we could call the convention and say, our Sunday school is lacking. They'd send a Sunday school consultant in, and we would have a training seminar on what we can do to develop Sunday school. They helped with building programs. When Pastor Harness was here and they built the Family Life Center, I was here, and the Florida Baptist Convention had a consultant come in, and he helped us with the capital fundraising on how to do that. We went to Keystone. We built a Family Life Center up there. We called Florida Baptist Convention in, and they helped us. What we did up there, we had run out of room, Sunday school room, and the church was newer. They just built a fellowship hall, but the old Sunday school rooms were old. They were tongue and groove, and they were just. So we called the convention and said, "Hey, would you come in and do an evaluation of our facilities?" The guy came in and he looked around and he said, "My recommendation. I tell you what I think." He said, "I think I think your senior adults are important because you just built a brand new facility for them." And he said, "I think worship is important because your worship center is fairly updated. But I think your youth and your children and your Sunday school takes a back seat." And he explained why. So they recommended that we build something. So that's the type of resources there. We don't have to do what they say, but they're there to help us with that. I mean, as far as that, as far as training, every year we have a Florida Baptist Convention. It's spread throughout the state. Anybody's welcome to go that's a member of Southern Baptist Church. And there they'll discuss the activities of the state, what's going on. But the Florida Baptist Convention does a multitude of things. We have a dental unit. It's a mobile dental unit, and all we have to do is call and say, hey, listen, we'd like for your dental unit to come in. We have to get the dentist that will come in and volunteer their time, and they'll set up shop, and they'll do dental work for free. So there's a lot that they do. Migrant work, they do a lot with migrant workers, and meeting their needs as well. We have a convention ground in Lake Yale, which is just outside of Leesburg, that the Florida Baptists own, and so we can go up there and training and sessions and things like that. So it's really a good organization, the Florida Baptist Convention. So we're part of the Pasco Baptist Association locally. Then we go to the state level, and we're part of the Florida Baptist Convention on the state level. Again, over 2,400 churches at the Florida Baptist level. Then we cooperate with the Southern Baptist, which is the largest, by the way, Protestant denomination in the world. Right now, and I just pulled up some statistics before I came over, and this is as fresh as we can get. The president of the Southern Baptist Convention right now is Pastor J.D. Greer out of North Carolina. We have had past presidents. I'll probably mention some names that you would probably know. Adrian Rogers. I don't know if you've ever heard of Adrian Rogers. Paige Patterson, Jimmy Chapman. And these were all men who took the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention, and we went from a more of a liberal, moderate role to a more conservative role. Adrian Rogers was instrumental in making that transition back. Now, you understand, it sounds pretty easy to do, but you're talking about changing the mindset of seminaries. You're talking about the mindset of churches, the mindset of everything. So it was a major issue. But Dr. Greer now is our president. He's a young fella, probably younger than any president that we've had. His church is different than any Southern Baptist church that the president's been from before. They have several campuses throughout. He does a good work up there. Let me tell you a little bit about Southern Baptist. Right now, we have 47,530 Southern Baptist churches in the United States. That's a lot of churches, 47,000 as of 2019. We have over 14 million members, 14,525, and some, I say change, I shouldn't say that like that. But here's the sad part. Our weekly attendance as of 2019 was only 5 million people out of 14 million members. That's not good. That's a third of, just roughly a third of your membership that we have. So there's some areas that obviously we need to work on. Like I said, we are the largest Protestant denomination in the United States, the second largest Christian denomination. Of course, Christian denomination would be the Roman Catholic Church. They would be first with that. Southern Baptist Convention is a group of, like I say, all of these churches meeting, and under the title of Southern Baptist. We have a Baptist Faith and Message that's been written and rewritten that tells you exactly what our stance are on just about anything that you want. The inerrancy of Scripture, the virgin birth, everything that we talked about earlier. As a matter of fact, if you look at our website or some of our, I think our Constitution even states that we adhere to the Baptist Faith and Message. So that means we agree with everything that they do there. The convention meets once a year to Southern Baptist Convention. It's really interesting. If you've never been, I would encourage you to go. Again, as a member of a Southern Baptist church, you become a messenger. You just have to register for that. But what is interesting is, and have never been involved in that, you don't realize how organized it is. I remember going to the Georgia Dome, 1996, I think it was. And I don't know, it must have been 25,000, 30,000 people there. And so to do business in an orderly fashion, it takes quite a bit. But I was just so impressed. They had microphones set up. And so if you wanted to make a motion, what you had to do, you had to address them. You had to come to the microphone. And then you had to state your name, your state convention, I think your local association, name of your church. And then you say, I make a motion that. Then it had to be written out. At that point, there was a carrier that took it back to a committee on committees who looked at it and determined if it was something that needed to be, for example, when I was there, there was a motion made on the floor that we impeach the President of the United States. Well, really not pertaining to a whole lot there, but they still took it very seriously. They went back, and said motion number 1436. And so they take it back. This committee on committee reviews it. Then the next meeting, and meetings go, they would usually start on, I think they started on Monday morning in those days and went to Wednesday night. So you'd have a morning session and you'd have an afternoon session. So if it was presented in the morning, in the afternoon they'd come back and they'd say motion 1636 was denied based upon, stupidity. They wouldn't say that, but that's what they wanted to say. But it's very well organized. That's my point I'm trying to get. Now, the neat thing about the Southern Baptist Convention is that they put a lot of emphasis into evangelism. Anytime there is a convention held in a city, they always do what they call a crossover. The crossover is where you go in maybe 3 or 4 days early and you just canvass neighborhoods and you share the gospel with neighborhoods. So that's a big part of that. But also, they have 6 seminaries that I'm very proud of. They have Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. Dr. Al Mohler is the president up there, very strong. They have Southeastern in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And I don't know who the president is there. They have New Orleans, that's where Charlie graduated from. Jim West, who we just voted on this morning, graduated from Southern. They have those 3. They have Midwest. They have Southwest, where I graduated from. And then they have one in California. As an active Southern Baptist, if I go to seminary, then my cost is half of what it would cost if I was a non-Southern Baptist. And that comes from the cooperative giving that we give. In our budget we'll look at next week, there's a certain part of our money that goes to the cooperative program. They, in turn, help the students get into college and get into seminary and do that. So that's just a little thing, but it's really, really neat. A little bit about the Southern Baptist Convention to kind of fill you in on that a little bit is there's 1,161 local associations, Pastoral Baptist associations. So there's over 1,000 of those. 42 state conventions. While Florida has its own state convention, some areas don't have. There'll be 2 or 3 states together, or areas that they will call them. It's a state convention. But all 50 states and all the territories are covered by that. But the 5 largest state memberships, who do you think they would be? Well, you got to go to Bible Belt. So, that Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, and Tennessee. Texas has the largest members. They have over 2.75 million Southern Baptists in Texas. But interesting about that, Southern Baptist in Texas split with, again, but I'll never forget this. When I graduated from Southwestern, Dr. Russell Dilday was the president, and I thought he did a good job. I'm just trying to get my education and get home. And, we graduated in May, and they had a Board of Trustees meeting in March, I think it was, or April. And the word was they were going to fire Dr. Dilday because he was promoting his ideology, under the hat of president of Southwestern Seminary. So he had been warned that he can't do that, and he had a little bit more of a modernism concept. So they come out on stage. We had chapel once a week, and so this chapel, they come out, and all the board of directors and the presidents are all holding hands in unity. We're unified. Well, they fired him the next day. So I don't know what happened overnight, but oh my goodness, what a shock that was. And that was a learning experience for a lot of those young men, because seminary is postgraduate. You get your 4-year degree, then you go to seminary. So a lot of these guys had graduated from high school and right to college, and they went into seminary. And I mean, you would have thought these guys were crying. They had badges with Dr. Dilday's picture on it, and they were camped out on his front lawn saying they couldn't do this. And probably the seminary didn't do it. I mean, they came in the next day and changed locks and took his name off the door. And so there was a little rough edge there. But I will say this, that it's a great it's a great thing to have these seminaries to be able to teach young men and women about ministry, and that's what they do. So we have 6 seminaries that is supported by the cooperative program. Um, mission. Well, let me tell you a little bit about where our, and I think this is a sign of the times. I read something this week, and it doesn't really pertain to this, but I think it does. We're finding out now that, according to statistics, once the COVID has hit, average church attendance, brick mortar, what it used to be, runs anywhere from 10 to 40% of what you had before. That's a big decrease. When we went down in March, we were right around 300 on Sunday morning. This morning, I want to think that I got a text message, and I think we were at 154 this morning, or maybe even higher. No, it was higher than that. It was 170 something. So we're above that a little bit. But I say all that because we're seeing a decline in church attendance. And this article that I read came from a Church Growth magazine, and the question was, is this caused by the COVID, or is this something that's been going on for a long period of time? We'll give you some statistics to kind of let you know. Within the Southern Baptist realms, our membership at its highest point ever was in 2005. We had 16,600,000 members in 2005. From that point, it's slowly but surely gone down just about every year. Now we're down to 2019, 14,259,000. So we're seeing a decline in membership. Now, where does that come from? Well, I think it comes from something we talked about earlier, is denominationalism is not a big thing with the millennials. There's not a commitment to a Southern Baptist or a General Baptist or a Northern Baptist. Millennials are, I'm going to go where I'm getting fed, and then if I don't get fed, I'll go someplace else. That's their concept. Now, I think that's not just in churches, but I think that's across the board. As you look at marriages, as you look at jobs, you know, how long did you work where you work? How many? 25 years. And I mean, when I got my job at the phone company, my intent was I was going to be there until I retired. I wasn't thinking about ever changing jobs. Now, on the average, I want to say the average lifespan of a job for a millennial is, I want to say, maybe 3 to 5 years, and they switch jobs. So these numbers that are dropping, we can make excuses. I'm not making excuses, but I think that part of that is the world in which we're living now. We're finding now with online that there's some folks it's easier to stay home than it is to come to church. And I understand that. You know, we've got one poor lady, bless her heart, she's up in her years. She said, I don't want to come to church. I don't feel safe. And I certainly understand that. But I think that it's reflective now in our membership as it starts to decrease. Now, what happens when your membership decreases, everything else decreases. Your giving, your baptisms, everything falls in line with that. So I say all that because it's been a difficult time for Southern Baptists. There's a lot of churches now that are non-denominational. So they have no denomination affiliation whatsoever, and they just, and they're good churches. I'm not saying they're not. I mean, they do a good work. But as a Southern Baptist, our folks go, and they found this non-denominational, and I don't really, and I think it depends on the church as well. I've been in some Southern Baptist churches where it's just been dyed in the wool. I mean, everything was Southern Baptist. And I've been in other Southern Baptist, you wouldn't even know they were Southern Baptist church unless you knew about them. And we kind of lean that way. Not that I have anything against it, but it just seems to be the way that we're meeting needs of people. So there's been this decline in that. Part of it is a millennial, I think, concept. Part of it also, I think, is the world is changing in so many ways. I think that the new thought process of I'm trying to say this properly. The thought process of our core values don't always adhere to the millennials or the younger generations. And so we stick by what we believe, and as a result, they're like, well, you know what? I'm not real sure about that. I think For example, I think gays can get married, so I'm going to go to this church because they open their doors to that. Now, shame on us for not having a stronger, a firmer conviction on that our folks wouldn't even have to hesitate about thinking about that. No, it's not what the Bible says. I'm going to stick by what the Bible says. But that goes back again. Again, I'm just chasing rabbits with this, but that goes back again is we just want to fill the church. We really don't care. We just want a lot of numbers. And that comes back to bite you sometime or another. And I think that's what's taking place here. So, and I quote here, the decline in membership in baptism has prompted some Southern Baptist Convention researchers to describe the convention as a denomination in decline. Former Southern Baptist Convention President Frank Page suggests that if current conditions continue, half of all Southern Baptist churches will close their doors permanently by the year 2030. That's only 10 years away. And that's kind of a startling comment when you stop and think about that. But again, you know, you take a church, it's only got 80 people in it. And usually those churches that have only 80 people in it are what I would call mom and pop churches. And I got to be careful. I don't mean that, but I mean it's family owned and operated. I remember doing a revival in Graceville. I don't know if you know where Graceville is. It's just south of Dothan, Alabama. I'm sure that will help you. I remember doing a revival in this church, and a fellow called me and said, "Hey, would you come and do revival?" And I said, "Sure." So I went in, and it was the same people every night. And this one was this one's brother-in-law, and this one was that one's mother-in-law, and they were all family-owned and operated. So, you know, a church, I think on our good night there we might have had 25 people at revival. And churches like that will, as this continues to decline, they'll close their doors. And so we're going to find ourselves in situations we've never been in before. It's interesting. My revival work must not be... I did the same thing in Marissa, Illinois. You know where Marissa, Illinois is? I didn't either. It's just outside of No Hope. And in seminary, this was one of the classes I took. It was called Spring Practicum. And it was in the springtime, and you went to class for 6 weeks, and then they sent you to a church, and you did revival for a week. Maybe I've told you the story. If I have, just amuse me. And I was selected to go to Marissa, Illinois. And I was hoping I was going to get Hawaii or Alaska, but I got Marissa, Illinois, southern part of Illinois. And I remember going in, and it's a real small church, and realizing that that's where most Southern Baptist churches were. I had come from a pretty large church. I came from First Newport, so it was a pretty big church. And when I went to seminary, I joined a big church, and I go up here, and this guy's got maybe 15, 20 people every night. And it's like, but that was, you know, and it was a great learning experience for me because those guys work just as hard as the guy who's a pastor of a mega church. But because they don't have the name, that's always been kind of a sore rub with me, is you take guys out here that's working themselves to death in a small church, meeting the needs of the people. You never hear about them. You always hear about the pastors of these big churches who have a staff of 35 to 45 people. And usually when a pastor gets to a church that size, he doesn't really pastor the church. He pastors his staff, and the staff in turn pastor the church. So he's responsible for 35 staff members, and 35 staff members are responsible for 7,000 people. But I find that as I read this statistic here, if that be the case, it would really be kind of scary because that's only 10 years away that over half the churches could close their doors. Now with COVID, I'm not for sure what that's going to play into it because this was in 2019 pre-COVID. So it's something to look at it and kind of be concerned about, I guess, in a way. So that's where we stand. New River Association, local churches. We work here together, 34 churches. Florida Baptist, 2,400 churches, 2,400. And then Southern Baptist. And that, like I said, is now, 14 million members of there. So that's kind of cooperating. Now, let me talk about our missions because this is what makes, I think, Southern Baptist a little bit different than others. We have predominantly two mission boards, they're called. One is the International Mission Board, IMB, and the other is the North American Mission Board, NAM. And we always do that to confuse people, but that's what we do. There's pros and cons to both of those. The International Mission Board is the work that does international missions. So these are folks who go overseas, committed to work in fields. Sometimes they're easy, sometimes they're not. I remember when we were in seminary, I met an attorney from Brownsville, Texas, and his wife was a professor at, it was a women's college in Brownsville. They gave up their practice, and she gave up her teaching career to go on a mission field. They couldn't tell us where they were going because it was a closed country. And I'll never forget them as long as I live, because I thought, man, they had everything. And they gave up. They had to come to seminary for some training, and they sent them out. So our International Mission Board does a great job. We talked, one of the downfalls of that is we don't get a chance to meet our missionaries on a one-to-one basis. Although we do get promotional material, and we can pray for them by name, we don't get to know them. So that is kind of the downfall that I see with that. But the upside of that, as a missionary, if you're a missionary and you're underneath the International Mission Board, you know that your funds are going to stay pretty consistent. Now, as the giving goes down, of course that's going to go down, but if you're supported by a local church, and that local church's giving goes down, the first thing that's going to get cut is that missionary who's someplace overseas that we'll never see again. So let's worry about paying the power bill, that type of thing. So let me tell you a little bit about the International Mission Board. Right now there's 3,565 missionaries on field. That's of September 30th, so that's even less than a month old. 3,565 missionaries actively on field. There are 1,209 people groups that's engaged by the International Mission Board. In other words, there's 1,200 mission groups that we're dealing with, whatever those groups would be, countries, tribes, or whatever. As of last year, there were 89,000 new believers through the works of our missionaries. So they're doing a good job. They really are. So not only are they reaching and winning people to Christ, but there was 18,598 pastoral trainings given. So we're not just going in and winning people, but we're training the locals how to continue the work once we pull out. And that is huge to me, because I've been in areas before where we go in every year, and they don't do anything until we get there. And they're like, well, they're coming back, so they'll do everything. And that's not the way it needs to be. We need to train that leadership. Now, that's pastoral trainings. That's just sitting down with a group of pastors and training. On top of that, there were 35,000 advanced theological trainings getting. This is to a deeper level, that we were training at a deeper level, not just to be leaders, but to be leaders upon leaders, I guess would be the way to put it. 38,000 church plants. So that's a lot of work being done. Now, again, that's across the globe. 47,000 new baptisms. So we baptized right at 50,000 people overseas last year. And but there's still 3,056 unengaged, unreached people groups that we haven't reached yet. So, there's the now. That doesn't mean they haven't been reached. They haven't been reached. They haven't been reached by another group, that by Southern Baptist they haven't. A little bit about the goal of the International Mission Board has just been one thing, basically, and that's to bring the gospel of Christ to the people of the world, the lost people of the world. 1845, the first Southern Baptist Convention, it was called the Foreign Missionary Baptist, and FMB, that's when that was developed, and their part was basically just to take the gospel around the world. First missionary field that Southern Baptists went to was China, and because of the Civil War, when this was all developing, our missionary efforts were at that point very, very dim, to say the least, but they spread throughout China. Then we went into Africa. Debt became a major issue because of, and this is a terrible thing to say, but between 1861 and 1943, that's a long time, debt was a major part of the lack of missionary efforts that we could do. And really, it wasn't until after World War II did we see the efforts really pick up overseas. So having said that, it's off and running now. So our International Mission Board is doing a good job. It's stationed out of, I want to say Norfolk, Virginia, or someplace up in the Virginia, someplace. I don't know if it's Norfolk or Richmond. It's Richmond, Virginia. So that's how we do our missionaries. So when you give your tithe to our church, and we'll talk about this next week, part of that money that you give goes to the cooperative program, who in turn gives to the International Mission Board. So that's how we are giving to our missionaries. So let's say that we'll have some numbers for you next week, but let's say that we give, I think out of our budget, we have, I want to say 7% goes to the cooperative program, 2% goes to the Florida Baptist Convention, and 1% goes to Arab Lighthouse, LNI Med, which I don't know if you've met them or not, but they're local. They're members of our church. They're not in the Southern Baptist Missions program. They're with Arab Lighthouse, but they do a great job. So that's the 10% that we give. Now, of that 7%, when we give it to the cooperative program, some of that money goes to seminaries, some of that goes to International Mission Board, some of that goes to North American Mission Boards. So it's spread out that way. So that's how we give in our missions like that. Now, anybody's welcome to give to any missionary they want to, but that's just how we do that. We'll have groups come in sometimes. I remember we've had Children of the World, I think it was. They came in and did a concert, and a lot of people picked up and helped us and sponsoring some students there and some children. We have folks sponsoring people in Haiti. Some of the work that we do in Haiti, they have an orphanage, they have a school, and they have a senior adult home. And so some of our folks have elected to help sponsor a senior adult. And how do you sponsor a senior adult? Well, they have needs, food and medical, and so some of that goes there. So we can do whatever we want to. I will tell you this, that our church has developed a missions committee. And since, what was the hurricane that hit the Bahamas? The one that just kind of just hammered it hard. Anyway, you remember the ones like 2 years ago. So what our missions done is, what our missions committee is just developing, and I'm so grateful for them because they've done a good job. But when we do special emphasis on missions, when we're actively involved in missions as best we can, we'll do fundraisers. To go on a mission trip to like Haiti, it will cost, the average cost there, raw cost, I say raw cost, but is right around $1,100 for a week. Gosh, that's a lot of money. Well, by the time you get airline transportation down, then you pay down there to stay, it doesn't take long. In-country cost, in that in-country cost, that you have to pay for translators, you have to pay for security, you have to pay for water. Sometimes you have to pay for ice because, they don't have the money. And so you come in with a team of 12 and say, man, we'd like some water when we work. Well, the average salary down there is like $200 a year. So they don't have it. So we have to take all that. But we do all that, and we come up with a cost, and then we put out, we're looking at a mission trip. And if you're interested and you feel like the Lord could be leading in this, we'll have an organizational meeting. Then we do some fundraisers. And out of those fundraisers, we try to get that trip cost down to where it's workable. We've gone for as little as $50 after fundraisers because the church has been so supportive. And we've gone where it's cost $400 or $500. It just depends. We do a couple major fundraisers. One, we do a golf tournament. That's been very successful. We do a missions auction, which is a hoot. But it's a good fundraiser. And I think that's the two major ones that we do. And then, we might do something. We did barbecue one year, and we found out that wasn't a very smart thing because I think we ended up making about $3 per hour on that for the team. So, we're learning. But all that being said, we do those types of missions as well. But I want to tell you that in the last, since the Bahamas, we were there in June or July doing work in the Bahamas. The hurricane hit, and it hit Freeport, and that's where we were at. The church sent $6,000 down to the local church down there with the stipulation that it be used to help their membership. And so they bought drywall. They brought, we were encouraging them to use locals instead of bringing people in from the States. Use locals and pay them to get the economy up. So we sent $6,000 there. We've just sent out a check last week $1,000 to Haiti for food, and then we just sent, I think, 50 Bibles out to a church in Wyoming. So our interest here as missions is a little bit more than just IMB. We're trying to do and you know what I found, and I found this, is I found that when people really get involved in missions, not just giving but going, it really makes a difference in your church. And not everybody can go, we understand that. But it's amazing when we come back from a trip and say, listen, this is what we've done, let me show you. And we show a picture or we tell you a story. The person who sat there and said, you know what, I bought a picture at that auction, and part of that money I gave helped that. It really just draws us together. It's really amazing. Haiti has my heart. I don't know if we'll ever get back to Haiti again right now. Again, there's violence, there's unrest. They won't let you come in if they feel it's unsafe. But for years, we worked in Port-au-Prince. We worked up in the mountains in a town called Mirabel, Las Cahavas, and a town called Inch. I'm probably saying that wrong. And they're very poor. I mean, extremely poor. And we would go in and we would feed VBS. And we would have, we've had up to 500 kids at VBS. We'd do a pastoral leadership, and we would feed them beans and rice. It cost us $500. And for some of those kids, that was the only meal they got that day. And their eyes were like this just to see that. And it's like, wow. And if we could get a goat, we'd buy a goat. They would butcher a goat. And some of the stories you have is just phenomenal. But these kids just, oh my gosh. We were in Port-au-Prince, and they had an orphanage. And we went to the orphanage, and we were doing VBS. And there was a school involved. And they've learned that only the strong survive. And there was a set of twins. And so we were giving out backpacks. And the twins, one of them was strong and the other was weak. So the strong one got his backpack for him, and he took and hid it in his shirt, came back up and got one for his brother. And that's how they survived. And there was a little girl there, I'll never forget as long as I live. She was probably 10 years old. And she was so happy. She was the cook for the school. And she took us down to her kitchen. And it was downstairs, and it was just an open fire. And she had a couple pots, and she was trying to explain to us, this is where I cook for all of this. She couldn't go to school, but she could cook for the school. She lived upstairs in a cardboard box. She took us up to her top roof, and there was a cardboard box, and she had her clothes laid out. And when the earthquake came, it wiped that out. Those things just haunt me forever and ever, because you never know, But on the other side of that, you do revival, or you do pastoral, or you do VBS, and these kids are just so grateful for whatever you bring to them. And I remember my wife, we had a little boy, and he cut his finger, and he was crying. And she's, what's wrong? Of course, you have to have, and so he put up his finger, and big old tears were coming down. And we didn't have a Band-Aid with us, but she took some tissue paper and wrapped around it and put tape on it. So next day he came back, showed it to her. Next day, for 3 days, he showed it to her. Came back the next year, and he came up and pointed his finger, like, remember me. And those are the things that, just really grab you. But I'm glad to say that we are involved with International Mission Board, but we're also involved in doing our own missions as well. So International Mission Board, I don't know how I got on that, but I can talk on missions all night long. The second form of missions we do is what we call the North American Mission Board. That's local. Let's say North America, that's United States, Canada, Mexico. That's North America, right? Okay, I didn't do very well geography in school. 6,800 missionaries there. But we don't think of them as missionaries as we do international missionaries. These are chaplains working in prisons. These are church starts who go out into an area and start a church. They'll go into a housing development, and they'll do a backyard Bible club, and there they'll get kids involved, and then they'll do a block party, and then they'll start a church. They serve in some real difficult places, these North American missionaries, because, like you say, chaplaincy in prisons and jails, truck stop ministries is another area. I will say that out of the North American Mission Board, there was 908 new congregations started in 2019, and that's been the most in a long time. 552 new church starts out at 908, 59 new campuses. By campuses, that's an affiliation. It would be like us having a church, and we're going to have a campus in Tarpon Springs. And so there would be an affiliation. We'd send somebody down there to do that. And so that's another for, what we found is, even we found when we were on a local church level, as we were talking about missions, and say, we go to Haiti, people go, I'm uncomfortable. And I understand it. It's not, it's a very difficult work. I mean, 24-hour guards, food, you don't really know what you eat sometimes, And people say, no, I don't want to. There's a malaria issue, et cetera, et cetera. But you could say, let's do this. Let's go to West Virginia. Let's work in a holler in West Virginia. And people are open. That's local missions. That's North American missions. And I think that we're seeing our folks are really involved in that. Even Bahamas, because they speak the language, you can drink the water. They've got air conditioning. They've got, electricity. So we're trying to spread ourselves out. Our plans this year, we had plans this year to do a trip to Haiti. And we had a trip to go out west, work with the Indian reservation. And they were all set up. And when COVID came, everything just shut down. Haiti's been shut down. They've now opened up again to some people, but not everybody. And out west, of course, it's very difficult to think about going out and doing a VBS. And, as we're experiencing here, very difficult to try to do something with people. But that's kind of our emphasis that we're trying to do here. And it's really that. Brian does it like tonight. Now, Brian has our youth out doing missions. What they're doing is they're working in somebody's home, washing windows or trimming trees or cleaning a yard. And again, that's missions, I think, and that's part of our home missions that we do as well. So, but at Southern Baptist, we have the North American Mission Board. That's local, what I call nationals. And then we have the international overseas. And they have both short-term and long-term. Let me give you just, I don't know, I think everybody knows Ahmed and Ellie. I don't know if you guys looked a little perplexed when I brought them up before. They were just here recently. Zach is their son. Now he's here. Ahmed is a born-again Muslim. And maybe I've told you, he does work in Beirut with TV, that type of thing. And we mentioned the other night that they're looking at doing a movie with a major producer here in the States. They just did Augustine, Son of Tears. It was very successful in the Muslim world, although there was a strong gospel presentation to it. So we as First Baptist support them financially, and we also support them prayerfully as well. We've got some folks in our church that serve on the board of directors for that ministry. That is a whole new area. And we talked earlier about training missionaries. One of the things that they're getting ready to do over there now is they're getting ready to start a missionary training facility in Beirut, which is really unheard of. So instead of a Westerner coming in and going to try to win Muslims over, we have Muslims who are born again, and we're going to train the Muslims on how to witness and how to train, how to do church in a simplistic form so they can reach their own people. And that's just phenomenal, I think. I'm really excited about that. So that's a little bit about us. So let me get one more page, and then we're going to be done for the night. Next week will be it. Gosh, I stretched just right out to 20 minutes to 7, haven't I? So let's talk about why not be an independent church. Now, and I didn't mention independent Baptist churches. There are some Baptist churches who are independent. They just do their own, and that's fine if that's the way they do it. But we are independent in a sense. Like I said earlier in our study, we are independently owned and operated. We're like a McDonald's franchise. There's no hierarchy over us. There's nobody telling us what to do and how to do it. As in other denominations, in the Methodist, and I'm not picking on Methodists, but a pastor might be at a church, and then the council might come out and say, you've been here long enough, it's time for you to move to another church. And so nobody has a say in it. You have to do it. I don't know how Lutherans work, but Catholicism is like that. Where here we don't have that. We have nobody denominational over us telling us what to do. So to be an independent church, yes, but we also have all the support of Florida Baptist, Southern Baptist, Pasco Baptist, International Mission Board, North American Mission Board, seminary training. and all of those things. So, um, now in your study guide there, just a couple of things. It says, for example, every Southern Baptist church chooses its own pastor. First Baptist Church of Elfers chooses its own pastor. We have a constitution, bylaws. At any time that the pastor would break those, they have the right to say to that pastor, we need to break ties. Or if that pastor feels like God's leading him into another church, he has the right to do that. But the church then picks it up, and they now then choose their own pastor. That's done by what we call a search committee. And usually what they'll do is, if a pastor, let's say I were to leave, they would go to the church and say, what do you think we need? Or that's what I would recommend to them doing. And say, do you want a young guy, you want a family guy, you want a married guy, you want a single guy, you want a doctor, and get a feedback from the church of what they're looking for. And then this committee then would advertise, for lack of a better term, that First Baptist Church of Elfers is looking for a senior pastor. If you just tuned in, that's not true, but I just want to, they're looking for a senior pastor, and if you'd like to submit a resume, you could do so. And usually you put a deadline on how long the resumes come in. At that time, all this is done. I tell you, I always tell people, if you want to strengthen your prayer life, get on a search committee, because you really need to pray when you're on that. And that search committee then will take and evaluate. They'll look at the resumes, and there'll be some that they will automatically call out. And I remember we were looking for a youth pastor at Keystone, and I got a resume from somebody in India, and they said, I don't speak very good English, but I think I could learn. Like, well, probably not going to be a good fit for us here. So we were able to call him out, so to speak. But they will do that, and then they will narrow, depending on how many resumes you get, you can narrow it down to maybe 10 or 15 and say, committee, would you look at this and pray over this, and let's talk and let's see what you find. This guy says, well, I see that, he's been in a church for 3 years and he leaves again. I don't know if that's a good thing. And somebody else say, well, yeah, but look how the church grows. So they'll kind of talk it out, and they'll come to a consensus. And then they keep narrowing it down. And if they, in my opinion, if they do what they need to do, they narrow it down to one person. They shouldn't play dog against dog. Well, let's look at this guy and let's look at this guy and see who we like best. No, God's leading in this. You need to be the one. And so they'll narrow it down. At that point, somewhere along the line, they'll usually contact the applicants and say, we received your resume. Has anything changed? Are you still looking? And then as they narrow it down, then they'll start the interview process. Depends on, nowadays you can do Zooms. It used to be that you had to meet, but now we can do phone conferencing and everything else. So they will do that. When they get to the point that they feel like this is the man, then they will pursue it. They'll ask for a copy of a sermon if you're a preacher. And now with on live, they can just say, well, we're live. You can look at it and see. And then as they pursue, then they'll start to seriously sit down and say, okay, we feel like we're getting close here. Let's talk. And then, then at that point, it gets to the point of, well, what's the vision for the church? Whenever I've been interviewed, I'm like, well, tell me what you want. Where do you think the church is headed? And I've had churches say, well, we just want to get back to where we were at. And, well, I'm not for sure that's what I want to hear, because you're not really looking to grow. You're just wanting to stabilize. And I've had churches say, we just want somebody to lead us and love us. And so then you start to mesh these theologies and these ideologies and these personalities together. And then you get to a point where you start talking about salary. That has to play into it. And when they feel comfortable with it, in our Constitution bylaws, there is a whole thing that we have to do when they're ready to call a pastor. They have to announce his name 2 weeks in advance. They have to put his resume out for a week. There's a certain thing, and then they bring him in view of a call. Usually the pastor will preach, and then there's usually a question-and-answer period from the congregation. I think here it might have changed now, but they vote that night when we were voting. So it depends on different churches. I went to Keystone. They interviewed. They wanted me to preach a revival, and I just didn't think that was wise to be there for a week, because you could split the church, So we went in for a weekend. We preached on a Sunday. We preached on a Friday. Preached on a Saturday, Sunday, and Sunday night. Question and answer on Sunday afternoon. They had a business meeting on Wednesday night, and then they voted on Sunday. They extended the call. Once that's done, then the pastor has the right to say, yes, I feel God's leading us, and then we set up a date. But each church has its right to choose its own pastor. Nobody from the convention says, well, you need to get this guy from Lutz, or, it's just that church has its right to do that. That's what's so unique. As a Southern Baptist church, we're still an independent church. Each church, we own its own buildings. The Florida Baptist Convention owns nothing. Pastoral Baptist owns nothing. Everything that we have is owned by First Baptist Church of Ellsworth. And, there's a lot to be said for that. It really is. I mean, that's faithfulness of people who's been here for years and poured their hearts into these ministries and in these buildings and in these churches. And there's a lot to be said for that. So everything is ours, so to speak. And then each church determines its own priorities. I always tell churches that we need to seriously look at what our target group is. The target group is a business term, but as we look at the congregation, who do we want to target? And I need to say this cautiously is, well, let's target young adults. Okay, if we're going to target young adults, one thing, we can't forget our seniors because they're the experienced, they're the ones who got us here. And we can't forget the middle agers because they're the ones who's doing it now. But if we're going to target young adults, then we need to kind of gear things towards them and pray that these other demographics come in line. And most of the time, if you set out a clear vision with that, people will be good with that. I know some churches that don't want to grow. They just want to maintain. And that's usually those who within 10 years will be shutting their doors, So, I mean, that's just how it is. I had an aunt and uncle in West Virginia, and I said something about what kind of a visitation. Oh, we don't do any visitation. No, we just kind of come every Sunday and every Wednesday and do our thing, and that's it. So they didn't want to. They were okay to maintain. So we have to have our own priorities of what we feel as a church is what we want to do. And so we do that. So what's the advantage of affiliating with the Southern Baptist Church? Well, it allows us to fellowship with other Christians around the world who are known for their like commitment as ours to the Word of God. We have no man-made creed. Our creed is the Bible. So we look for that. So we have the opportunity to fellowship with other Christians around. That's why it's so easy to work with IMED and Ellie, because they're right on board with everything we are, And it allows our church to participate in, as we said, the largest missionary organization in the world through the cooperative program. So that's the advantages of being a Southern Baptist church. I've never been anything but Southern Baptist, so that's probably not a good thing. But I know that there's a lot of good churches out there that are not Southern Baptists. But I'm grateful for what we have as a Southern Baptist with the support, with the resources. It really makes a difference. The sad part about it is when you're affiliated with somebody, you're affiliated with everybody in that. But do you remember when Disney came out years ago and they were going to boycott, or Disney came out years ago, and I think it was they were having a gay week or something. Southern Baptist said, we're going to boycott Disney. So we were known for not what we stood for, but what we stood against. And our boycott really didn't do a whole lot of damage to Disney. The way that you change things like that is you work from the inside out. You get Christian producers and directors and animators and cartoonists and characters and actors, and you work from the inside and you change them that way. So for years, Southern Baptist has been known for what we stood against, not what we stood for. And that's been kind of the black eye sometimes. But all that being said, I would still, there's no other thing I'd rather be than that. Do we have flaws? Oh, yeah. Do we make mistakes? Sure we do. But I still feel like we've got the best thing going right now. So, any thoughts, any questions? Everybody all right? Anything surprise you I said tonight? You got that one through then. Well, next week we're going to look at our church, and it would be our last Sunday. Church is giving me a sabbatical for the month of November, so I'll be here Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and then we're going to take the month of November and take a sabbatical. Probably, again, it's a good thing for everybody. It was brought up to me several years ago, and you don't realize until you sit down and think about it how much you kind of pour in. preaching 3 times a week, 50 weeks a year, 150 sermons, and I've been here now for 10 years, so that's almost 1,200 sermons, not including funerals and outside speaking. So there comes a time when you get tired, you get dry, and, church is fragile right now, as every church is because of the COVID. But I think right now this is, so they talked to me a couple of years ago and said, would you consider a sabbatical? And I'm like, yeah. Well, we were hitting on it, it's like, okay, we'll get to it. And so now I think probably would be a good time to. Most pastors write a book on sabbatical. I just hope I can read one while I'm on sabbatical. That's kind of my hope. But we will be here next week, and next week we will talk about our church. We'll look at our budget. We'll look at our staff positions, their responsibilities, and how we kind of work as First Baptist Church of Elfers. We've got a good thing. We've got a great staff. I say I've been blessed with a great staff. But, everybody's cooperative on staff, and we have our bumps in the road, but that's when you work with people, you're going to have bumps in the road. But when it's all said and done at night, each of us would cover each other's back. I know that, and we've grown as a staff. It's sad to say that when we came, there's no original staff member left after 10 years. But that's part of direction sometimes, Charlie's been here for 9 now. Brian's been here for probably 6, maybe 7 years, so he's been here quite a bit. Rick, the school administrator, has been here for 9. Tara Lynn has been here for 3 years, I think, now. Who else we got on staff? Our bookkeeper, Wayne, we've hired, we have a church administrator now, and then with Jim, he's our new guy, so he will get everything dumped on him, but he doesn't know that yet. So maybe he's not going to watch tonight. We'll figure that out. But it's been good. God's been good to us, and He's got a good staff together. So only good days ahead. So we'll look at that next week, and we'll look at our budget and how we spend our money and how we come up with the budget. I always say a budget is not a financial statement; it's a faith statement that tells us what we really believe, and then we take that faith and we try to put it into the ministries that we have. And so God's been very good to us here. He really has. I know some churches right now that are way under budget, having a hard time meeting bills, and we're, as of last Wednesday night, I think we had a financial meeting. I think we were $3,000 in the black, which is good, considering all that we've been through. And God continues to pour His blessings out, so it's fun, Well, let's pray and let you guys go, and then we will. Don't not come next week now, because it could be exciting. And maybe it won't be, but anyway, you're going to have to come and find out. Father, thank you tonight for, again, our time, and as we've looked a little bit more in depth of who we are, and what we believe, and why we believe it. We thank you for that. We do pray tonight, Lord, that you might continue to bless our church. We continue to pray for your direction and for your wisdom, that in the days to come that we might continue just to be led and do the work that you have us to do right here in Pasco County through these venues that we've talked about, the Pasco Association, Florida Baptist, and Southern Baptist as well. So, Father, we pray for a good night's rest tonight, and protect us, keep us safe from this virus, and help us to continue to serve you, and we ask these things in your name. Amen.